You can put this in my professional development portfolio.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to not adhere strictly to the script then and take this a little more informal chat and casual. And of course, thank you for coming. Not how much choice you had. Thank you for coming. My caveat anytime I talk about Katie's music is that when I did my dissertation and anything else I did, I am not a theorist. I thought I was, but then I took analysis classes and went, oh, I don't believe this. And I was the kid in class, not a kid anymore, who would say the golden mean and whatever else in analysis and say, do you really think the composer was thinking about this when they wrote it? And the comp majors in the class would go, yeah, that. And the professor, and so I'd ask Katie, do you really think about these things? And her answer was, no, not really. She writes, and it comes out, and it's formed, and such as it is. So if you wanted Schenkerian analysis today, I will disappoint you. I cannot do a Schenkerian analysis anymore to save my life. This started as a product of my doctoral dissertation, which was saxophone music by American women composers, written in 1996 to 97. And I came up with about 125 works by 50 different composers. And people still occasionally write and say, hey, can I get a copy of the dissertation? IU Library won't loan theirs out. It's not on DAI. And it didn't get on DAI because IU was, I think it's their fault, transitioning graduate secretaries at the time that I finished. And nobody gave me the DAI paperwork, so it didn't get into dissertation abstracts. But somewhere it's referenced, and people do still ask about it. But the catch is that, of course, that's 21 years ago, and it's out of date. We've added so many works by the composers who are already writing for saxophone, like Marilyn Shrewd and Jennifer Higdon, but then other composers like Elaine Lilios and Stacey Garrett and whose name I'm forgetting, Dorothy Chang, have come along, and the number of works by women composers has boomed. One of my duo partner, who's a singer, will say we shouldn't have to have festivals of women composers or women performers. It should just be music by composers or by performers. But I think we still have perhaps a little bit of work to do in representing women composers. The cool thing that came out of it for me was forming some connections with these people, talking to them about their process, and being able to just, what were you thinking when you wrote this, and develop program notes. So the dissertation is actually a reference source for people who want to go and play this piece and see what the composer had to say about it. Because I wasn't about to analyze all of those pieces either. Katherine Murdock taught at Wichita State University in Kansas. Is that right? Geography. Geography's failing me. I'm talking to so many people today, I don't know what country I'm from. And the saxophone teacher there was Jean Lansing. And as long as you guys are not a formal structure, Jean was one of my earliest heroines of the saxophone. Right after Eugene Rousseau came Jean Lansing, because I went to Rousseau master class after my sophomore year in college. And this was, I think, the first, I didn't get to hear a lot of saxophonists play, first of all, in my undergrad school, because my teacher couldn't play the saxophone. He was an oboist. And so other than Rousseau recordings, and whatever else was in our library, and recordings of alumni, I'd never really heard saxophonists in person. And so my first time at IU, I heard Frank Bongiorno and Ken Fisher, and here was one woman in the crew, Jean Lansing, who blew me out of the water, and who also, for reasons I can't ever understand, took this 19-year-old kid and said, hey, want to turn pages on my master's recital? And I watched that music go by and went, holy mackerel, when I can play this stuff, that'll be something. And I finally played all the pieces Jean played, so I'm very excited. Oh my gosh, these people actually coming in? Or are they lost? Okay. So Jean taught at Wichita, Jean taught at Wichita State with Katie, and several of her saxophone works were written for Katie and for the students there. Jean is an amazing saxophonist, and I think having that influence of someone who was so good as the saxophone sound and capability that she had in her ear had some influence. When I asked and said, so would you sit down with Jean and talk about these things and what you're writing and how it fits? Did you get critique from her? Or yeah, I can do that. No, I can't do that. Unlike me. Jean just said, there was never any of that kind of interchange. And I'll jump to a remark she made that I had later in the presentation. She said that when she composes, and that's a very distinguished photo of Katie taken at Carnegie Hall when one of her pieces was being premiered. But she's a much more earthy person. This was our summer barter for get her to write a piece for Georgia Made a Play at University of Illinois, NASA. And in exchange for writing the piece, I went out and spent about 3 or 4 days with Katie and her husband at their home in Fayetteville, Arkansas, went through her stacks of music, because it's only you three, I will tell you, she's packed. Her house could be on hoarders. And so if you see that one pile, I think those are CDs to the left, and there's a big pile in the corner of the floor that I'm betting is still sitting there, because she would bring things out and go, oh look, it's the health services brochure for my freshman year of college in 1967. I'm going, throw this crap out, what are you doing? So I was able to get my hands on all of her music, on as many recordings as she had, to take down notes. She had done a radio interview with one of her former students for public radio that I transcribed, got all the questions I had answered, did not get tick bites, at least found a few on me, got some spider bites. It was an experience, but it was a great time because even the first time we met, there was just this instant connection of like feeling and camaraderie and same philosophies of teaching and things like that. So we had joked for a long time that I would be her official biographer. I would be careful to her Mozart, and we have not stamped Bryan numbers on her pieces, but I've at least got everything in order. I think I need to go back someday and scan everything and become permanent Murdock archive, because her things that are digital, I can't get her to send me to email files or to create a Dropbox, and the things that aren't digital need to be scanned. And so there are holes in the Murdock archive online, but there is an archive online. Katie has about, I believe now, 60 catalog works, 11 of them for saxophone, one piece for English horn that I stole because it fits perfectly on alto saxophone. It's a lovely piece called Trees Dream of Dancing that I was like, I like this piece. Look, it fits. Can I have it? Sure. I think she did transpose the part for me. She also has a concertino for oboe, which fits for soprano, saxophone, and saxophone and wind ensemble. There's nobody here. I don't like our wind ensemble, so I haven't pushed to play that, but it's a lovely piece if you have a good wind ensemble. I should put my glasses on because I can't see all that I've got here. She was, in her peak, and a lot of her pieces were kind of paired. She would seem to write one thing and then another very close together, but over a span of 11 years, she wrote 18 pieces, I'll get it right yet. She was averaging a new piece about every 18 months, on top of other things, new pieces for saxophone. Katie is a California native. Oops, was it saxophone? Works. California native, grew up in what is now Silicon Valley, so her family property sold for massive amounts of money. You would not sense that meeting Katie. She went to school as a history major, and her Walter Mitty fantasy was to write historical fiction. And ultimately, these are the kinds of interesting things when you sit down and talk to a composer, you're like, whoever knew, who would have thought that? She left the history department for theater arts. And this is Katie in the center as Mercedes in Carmen. If you're an academic advisor, you have that privilege. I don't know, Nadine, you haven't had to suffer through that too much. Katie got to the end of her degree and went to clear for graduation, discovered she was 1 credit short. She needed a fine arts credit. And so she went and took piano. And she liked it. So she stayed and got another degree. And as she described this to me, it was it's very late 60s, 70s, where tuition was so cheap. Why not get another degree? So she spent about 7 years at Humboldt getting assorted undergraduate degrees. She also studied voice and piano while she was doing that, started composing in a 20th century theory class. And when she earned that second BA, she wrote a 1-act opera, which I do have the score for, or she has the score, I didn't get a copy of that. Hello. It's the photographer. but scholarly. But they encouraged her to go to San Francisco State University, where she got her master's in theory of the comp. The faculty at SFSU were so impressed with her work that they wanted her to apply to Eastman to study composition. And they told her, because she was a little hesitant about, gosh, that's a big school, and it's on the other side of the country, and I'm not sure I'm good enough. And they said, if you don't apply, we're going to submit the application for you. So she did apply and earned her PhD at Eastman, studying with Samuel Adler, Joseph Schwantner, and Warren Benson. I mentioned those names because they want to be recognized. I'd asked Katie different times what composers she admires, what composers she thinks she's influenced by, and she said there are two ways in which other composers affect her, whether she likes or dislikes their music, and what she strives for and what she avoids in her own writing. And so those she likes are quite varied, and they range from Brahms, Puccini, and Verdi, Debussy, Bartók, and Stravinsky, and the Americans Cole Porter, Richard Rodgers, Harold Arlen, and my favorite, Stephen Sondheim. While she admires those, she aspires in her own writing to be unique, to have her own voice, and lyricism, color, and drama are the things that she is actively trying to create, which I think as you listen a little bit, you will hear in some of her works. She has a great sense of what is idiomatic for an instrument. It awes me how much things fit the instrument. And so you look at something like Three Soliloquies for Unaccompanied Saxophone and say, wow, this is hard, but it always fits, it always makes sense. And when I come back to a piece like that, and I've done it about 6 times over 20 years, I come back to it, it still fits, but I find something new in it, something different that I want to bring out the next time I go to that work. So it's musically challenging, but it's also cohesive. There's form, though she's not, as I said, obsessed with creating a golden mean or achieving a specific thing. She's very fond of an arch form. We talked about those parts. So her first work for saxophone is Terra Incognita, which is for saxophone and piano. Oops, I think I have another Katie who's doing opera. This was Katie about the time she was in college in the High Sierras, California, which is also the title of one of her other works. I forget what it's for. Very often Katie's titles will have a double meaning. So Terra Incognita is that unknown space, the thing on old-time maps where here there be dragons. There's something beyond that we don't know what's out there. But she also talks about it being an introspective thing, about Terra Incognita, I wish Maria were here, being the unknown part of ourself, that we've not explored yet. A lot of her works, and this is one of them, were written, as she said, a request from a friend or a colleague to write a work for a particular occasion, very often a professional conference. And the title, in this case, how did she say it? She has written for, quote, not much money, but it's the thought that counts. So she's affordable, mercifully for me. Yes, the piano. This is one that is nearly entirely inside the piano, plucked strings, muted strings, and so the pianist stands for most of the piece. My pianist does not, maybe he's making a face like, my pianist gets tired playing this piece. I think we're on equal footing, we both get to stand. So it's in an arch form, one of her favorites. She says of the arch that there's something satisfying about coming home, that it's good to go away, but I try to be creative in the way that I get home again. So, if I have mastered the PC, which is a doubtful process, I'm going to come back to this as soon as I figure out how to get out of it. Please don't take a picture of this. Escape always gets you where you need to be. Back to the web. Where we go. Recording Terra Incognita. It should load. Is it moving yet?
This is
There we go. this, boys and girls? Wait. I said I hate PCs. Thank you.
Okay.
Sort of. Got it. That's coming from the web.
I'm not sure if now the sound is on or off. Let me just check. Oh, it's off.
If you need for
I think now it's okay.
some of the floor. Oh, well. That will make the other part work.
Thank you. I'm here if you need me.
Thank you. Let me find my other bit of notes. Will actually tell you what's on the CD and what's on the website. Simplify things a bit if I just stick to the web and don't try to use the disc. The next thing that she composed for saxophone again for Gene Lansing in a group called the Sotto Voce Trio at Wichita State is a voice, saxophone, and piano ensemble. Kind of the friends who wanted to play together, and so many of our chamber groups are formed with odd instrumentation because they're the people who we want to play with and have the opportunity to do that. The soprano of the group, Dorothy Crum, commissioned the turning, and it kind of takes Katie back to her early interest in creative writing. She wrote poetry for this piece as well as the music. She says it's much easier because I don't have to worry about copyrights. If I write the poetry, I don't need someone else's permission. And so she created the text for this as well as the music. Another form that reflects the cycle of seasons that are described within the poetry. It opens at the end of winter with the snow beginning to melt. It progresses, that's the movement called the thaw. Inclination describes the effects of the gradual tilt of the earth as the seasons start to change and the joy of spring. I'm not sure, actually this is not on the SoundCloud site, so I'll just read the poetry for you, because I think she has a lot of merit as a poet as well. Once again, the earth inclines toward softer breezes. Once again, the living air conspires with earth and rain, and love is made manifest in new life. Love run in chromatic riot, redolent of green and promise, dancing in foolish joy and inspiration to the breathing of the earth. Once again, as day and night progress toward equal measure, and nature's spell casts grace upon a waiting world, all is well, all lies before me. The new air tingles with possibility. Hope quickens and blooms, my spirit soars to each horizon. It's another double meaning to her title. The poetry describes not just the changes in the earth driving the year, but also the changes, and here I'm quoting from her program notes, the psychological development of the protagonist through the 5 songs, from high spirits to passion, despair, and finally peaceful acceptance. Confluence, which was the one that is not on the web. So, I don't know why it's not on the web. If I have a recording of this on CD, I'm not sure how to make it on the website, but I will fix that in the future. Okay. Part of the challenge is piecing together the recordings and going back and forth. So there's a SoundCloud site that has the audio, there's a website that has all of the other information. The website links to the SoundCloud. One of my students put a SoundCloud player on each of the pages. Somewhere now WordPress is popping up little ads that are kind of blocking some of the SoundCloud things. And so there may be things that I have, I need to go back, but at any rate, as I'm preparing for this, and I finally sat down last Thursday to work on it, and it's one of those, I need to be working on the lecture and the slideshow, but look, the website needs to be fixed on this and this, and this isn't formatted correctly, and this isn't in the right order, and I did all those things, and I'm like, well, I still haven't made progress on the lecture. The next thing Katie did for saxophone was an ATB trio called Out on the Edge. And then her first quartet piece, let me see if this is on the CD. It is on the CD and not on the web. I don't understand that. I'll fix that sometime. It was written for the Nova Quartet of Austin, Texas. A lot of programmatic elements. A movement called Dancing on the Edge is a very fast romp that changes meter each measure, every measure or two. Mysterium, a chant-like movement, and Hot Pursuit features a lot of tag teaming between them. There's a running 16th figure that starts in one pair of instruments, and then one person keeps it and it passes off to another, and then within about 32 bars, she's actually had every possible combination of the 4 players in the quartet doing this. If I could get to the CD controls, I might be there. We might be there. I'm afraid to close this window because every time I close a window, it doesn't come back. Turning, Deja Vu Quartet, assume that. I guess that little cone that looks like a traffic thing means that something's not working. So, my apologies. We'll go back to, well, see, I'm getting better at this. All right, we're skipping past hot pursuit, and that takes us to a blank card. Nope. Hop down here for a second. One of the things that is particularly fun about working with Katie is that she's got kind of a sense of humor. I mean, a great sense of humor. She does a newsletter every year. Do you get her newsletter? She calls it, that's later in the piece. But she kind of gathers little bits through the year, like the man who invented the hula hoop passed away, and major news events that happened. And the world was focused on this, but it's sort of news of the weird meets the Daily Show. News from Chautauqua is what she calls it. And I used to love when they came in paper form, and now she's gone digital. And I have to confess, I have not read the digital ones. It's just not the same as the hard copy. But two parts here. One is that if you've noticed the manuscript thus far, she had, I think, beautiful hand manuscript. If you sure deal with students now, that when we give them a manuscript of something, they go, but her manuscript is gorgeous. And she used different media. The first work, Terra, was done with pencil. Her trio bel canto, another 2 saxophone piano work, with speedball dip pens. And the next piece that you're going to see, the 3 soliloquies, was done with radiograph, which is an ink drawing pen used by draftsmen and graphic artists. She said, I have a little bit of artistic talent. I can't draw anything that looks like anything, but I can produce neat work. I sort of miss writing out manuscripts the old-fashioned way, except that it takes too long. The computer also really helps with storage and organization problems. I tend to misplace my handwritten manuscripts. I swear they're all in an alphabetical pile now, or that's how I left them. But she also tends to, again, in the old days, pre-tech, I would get fun little memos like this when she sent me a score for something, the rapidly aging workaholic, which I think actually probably took its toll on her. This is another one that's on the CD and not on wherever the CD is. I promise you the CD's in there. How are we doing on time? I don't have to talk that much longer. 3 soliloquies is Katie's unaccompanied work for saxophone. And she said it had 2 functions. One was the practical, which was that Jean Lansing was taking this piece to a women's composer festival in Alaska. And as we know in the academic world, getting travel money to be able to go to Alaska is challenging. For one person to take a pianist with you is more difficult. So an unaccompanied piece meant only one person has to go. The first time I gave this lecture, this was all I was doing at the conference. I said, I've beaten the system. I just now give a lecture on the music, and I don't have to take even a saxophone. That was a great trip. I really liked that. So she did 3 soliloquies, and her other challenge in that was to figure out how to use a solo voice instrument without the accompaniment and still get all of what she wanted to accomplish in her language. I skipped ahead to us. She also, within this piece, I think at its time, which was 1980 something, used probably all of the popular bag of tricks at the time. There's some altissimo notes, there are a couple of multiphonics, there's some key clicks. One movement at the end is the effect of birds flying off, and so it's a little key click with a of air through it. Nothing compared to the Strasbourg ensemble this morning. Did you get to hear that? Wow. I don't know how you slap tongue that long And mercifully, slap tonguing I don't think had been invented yet. Katie didn't know about it, so she's never made a slap tongue in anything. So this is 3 soliloquies. I would have played a piece for you, but I'll be lucky if I can get my CD back out of that machine. It is on there. I don't know why I don't have it on the website. Let me just do one quick check that it's not on the web. I'm pretty sure it's not on the web. It was last night, it's not on the web. Okay. The next thing, which was very exciting for us, was that I had grant money from our university long ago and far away. We had annual grants, one in the creative arts and one in the social sciences. We were the College of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences at the time. And you could write a proposal and get money. And it was, I think, $2,500. And so the money from that grant funded the commission of the piece, so I didn't know about her, you know, a little bit of money and good intent. And we also brought her to campus to do open coachings with our trio and to work with our comp students. So I hope I have the right photos. This is on the website. Yeah, just skip ahead here. So the Katie I knew from the web was this Katie. I had seen pictures of this woman who looked very austere to me. If you remember the old Lou Grant show and Nancy Marchand, who played the editor of the paper, and very intimidating and proper and Brahmin type woman, and I thought, oh my God, I've got to spend 3 days with this woman, and she looks really intimidating. And I got to the bed and breakfast to pick her up, and she was the most latent hippie earth mother I had ever met. So speaking of her sense of humor, I think we have next. When Katie and her husband renewed their vows, they went to Vegas for their 10th anniversary and had an Elvis minister marry. Katie's home is also, I mentioned that they could go on hoarders, wall-to-wall Last Suppers. And it started, I had to ask, I really had to ask, why? A friend of David's was going to Italy, and David says, yeah, bring me back for Last Supper. So he brought him back, I don't know, a little print or a little figure or a keychain. And it's never stopped. And I used to contribute to the cause until I've been to the house and seen it and went, I can't do them all. An entire wall, at least one, maybe 2, are covered with different versions of the Last Supper, including one with Poppin' Fresh, one where friends of theirs with great Photoshop skills put them and their friends on all the people at the Last Supper. There are 3-dimensional figures from every culture. There are plates. I gave her one that I found in my grandmother's stuff. You name it, it's there. It's just covered in Last Suppers. So that was the point where we got to sit down and talk, driving around town, and just find out how much we really look the same way at our students and at teaching, and what we felt about what we did. So we had open rehearsals with her. I'll remind you of the best line where there's a piano interlude and Tom appears on the piano. She's saying, I just don't know, I'm not sure what to do with this. I don't know what it is. And George and I were sitting back and listening, and he said, because it was piano solo, he says, need more saxophone. But
you have to mention what piece it was.
Oh, well, I get there. Longing Past the Moon is written, yeah, there we go. I also have a complete score of this. She started writing it in the summer of 1999 and was thinking about, because there was a lot in the news, about the anniversary of the moon landing, which was also very significant to me because I remembered as a little kid being allowed to stay up and watch them land on the moon. And so it parallels her other works, Terra Incognita in the Turning, in that it has an arch form, it is a slow ethereal opening, there's a fast section with a lot of interchange between the parts, a lot of imitation, which is one of her favorite techniques, so she said she never uses it strictly. And the title then is also both Longing Past the Moon in that actual journey by NASA, but also the personal journey to find out what's out there, what's beyond. And watching getting better at this. I hope. Ta-da! Just the alto saxophone part. And I'm going to skip ahead because George knows this one quite well. Because I want to get to another piece that I really think is cool. I'm getting better. I've lost my slideshow. I have a slideshow. I'm going to talk through the rest of it, and then I just love this wind quintet piece that I want to give you a chance to listen to the whole movement. The piece that followed, as she writes in pairs so often, or did when she was actively composing, Longing Past the Moon, is a work called Second Wind. It was for the clarinet teacher at WSU, asked her for a piece for the Laurence Wind Quintet, and they wanted to bring Gene Lansing into the quintet and to feature the saxophone. And since she had already written one quintet for winds, she called the second quintet Second Wind. They're very programmatic titles within the piece. She also said that Second Wind, besides being her Second Wind quintet, was her coming out of a self-described period of burnout, and the piece gave her a second wind as a composer, a new enthusiasm for her writing. She said this about the saxophone, and we always love great quotes about people who love the saxophone. Through Gene, I learned what an incredible instrument the saxophone is. I like it because it can do everything. Technical stuff, delicate soft playing, loud raunchy playing, lots of colors. It's versatile and you don't have to worry about covering it up. She also said in the notes for the piece, the three movements are simple in form, tonal, colorful, and melodic. In fact, one of my goals was to explore the beautiful melodic qualities of the saxophone, especially as played by Ms. Lansing. After many years of pondering my identity as a composer in an academic environment, I reconnected with the love of melody that made me want to compose music in the first place. So the theme of a journey, a progression, is at work again in this. The moth to the flame, the first movement, has elements of a sultry summer night. The more leisurely winter night takes us through the dark of the year, and heading for home is a light romp that concludes with an optional blues solo for the saxophonist. I'm going to hold on that for a moment because that will be the last thing we listen to, and we'll just come back so we can listen to all of it. Her two last or more recent pieces were Over the Hill, another work for the Sotto Voce Trio. They were all hitting the big 5-0 and wanted a piece, and again, Katie wrote the texts. The soprano wears her reading glasses on a chain and has a supply of birthday cards to pick up which say things like, "You look fabulous," for a person your age. And she concludes, ultimately, there's a point near the end of the song where they all get tired and they think about giving up. But finally she says, it's better to be over the hill than under it. Their band director, Victor Markovich at WSU, wanted a piece to show off the saxophone quartet. You guys have done the Cobras, right? And like that. I really like this. I'm trying to get our band director to do it next year. So she did a keyed up is the last word, but concerto for saxophone quartet that they premiered at a December of 2004. She adapted the last movement, keyed up, for orchestra just recently in spring of 2018, and it's now called Splendid Ascent. She's working on getting a recording of that. Trees Dream of Dancing, I mentioned to you earlier, is stealing a work for English horn and a clarinet and left it on clarinet and just took the English horn part. Varies a lot of motifs that is similar to Longing Past the Moon. It feels very familiar to me when I play that piece. And then her last commission for not a lot of money, in fact for no money, was Follow for 2 saxophones, soprano, tenor, and percussion that George and I premiered in Illinois in 2016? 14. One of those, hey, write us a duo for saxophone. Okay, here's your duo. And I added percussion, and we went, not taking a percussion. And I said, well, we'll get somebody there. Oh, it's very difficult. I don't think you can do that. It was very simple. We don't really get percussionists there. Katie retired in 2010 from full-time teaching. To the last of the Murdock photos.
Did she teach composition, or what did she teach?
She mostly taught theory
Theory,
as
okay.
well as comp. This was her retirement gift from the faculty. If you are up on names, that is Walter Mays on the right, also a very well-known American composer. And then Katie's life since retirement. David was an architect and designed and built their home on top of a Tony Mountain outside of Fayetteville, Arkansas. They do not normally dress as they are in the upper left corner. They were in a production down in the right of The Music Man, the local community theater, and got to play American Gothic as part of it. So she has not been writing much. From visiting with her, I can understand being tired and being done. But she has some interest and was mentioning that her next work would be a reed quintet, to which I said, get rid of all those other things and give me 5 saxophones.
Just go down to that summer thing.
Quite, that's what I'm supposed to be heading to as